Hello, my name is Andrew. I am the curator, editor, and otherwise complete creator of the indie game anthology bundle thing, Indiepocalypse. But to start off, like, what is the Indiepocalypse? Traditionally, I think it's like been used as a word to describe why somebody's flavor of the day game it wasn't as successful as their the game they were borrowing their idea shamelessly from. It's like the idea that my game can fail because there's too much art, or the fundamental idea that there can be too much art in the world to begin with, which is a very silly prospect for indie games or just like art in general. So I created this Indiepocalypse, and I decided to go based on that premise of like, there can't be too much art. That's ridiculous. That, and largely the idea of spite, in that I wanted to make smaller games, but there was no market for smaller games other than it being labeled as freeware, and I was not interested in particularly making freeware in hopes that people would be like, "Oh, I really like this. It's very cool. When's the full version coming out? When can I play an 8-hour version of this that's nice and short?" And I assumed I was not the only one. It's very common in other mediums to have short or versions of like anything. Like zines exist as a medium to work within, both in terms of like writing, in terms of comics, in terms of like poetry and media art in general. And there's like EPs, there's short films, there's all sorts of things, and I wanted to create a space for shorter games. So Indiepocalypse itself is a monthly, I referred to it as a zine. I begrudgingly at the time called a bundle zine because technically it is like a bundle of games, but I don't like the term bundle. It just doesn't sit well with me. I'm just not a fan of it. But anyway, it's not I don't like also anthology because it's not. The issues aren't thematically tied in any way. There's no through line. There's no theme per issue aside from the first issue where I ambitiously thought I could have a theme in each issue. But so basically it's a collection of 10 or games by 10 developers each month, and sometimes usually that's like one game per developer, but sometimes developer want to include like 3 or 4 games. It's like they have like a through line or they feel connected to one another. So basically it's 10 games, and since February of this year, kind of like the second year of Indiepocalypse, given that it launched February of 2020. Yes, 2020. So starting with issue 13 in 2021, each issue also has a newly commissioned game from a developer per issue. So the idea was that I would just take this all, and because I was talking about I was telling people for a while, basically the genesis of it all is that I was telling people for a while, that something like this should exist. I hate looking at my games and going, I have to scope up to a real game. Somebody should do this. Until I kept saying it long enough that eventually I just said, well, I should do it. And then I kept saying that I should do it until I finally just one day did it. And by doing it, the process was basically cold emailing, I don't know, 50 plus developers to finally scrape by 10 in an issue. Because I came from a place of nobody knowing who I am, and nor do I really have like a lot of money to give up for this thing. It's noted that this is also paid for everyone involved, both upfront and within royalties. Upfront mostly because early on I was like, very much nobody's going to buy this, so I need to pay people to account for the fact that there's going to be 0 sales. So I did that, and then it worked. And then starting the next month, I just started using Itch's jam pages and just like put up as a submission form because they're there. It's simple, and then people can just like immediately add their games. So it's a very easy way for people to create like collections and bundles, or just like basically submission pages for games, without having to like use a Google form or build your own website or just any of that stuff. People are already there. They already have their games. It's already like very easy for you to download it from there or play them on the web from there. So it's a very clean way to organize it all. And since then, I've been collecting them that way and occasionally still doing one developer per issue that I handpicked because my reach is only so far and wide. And then occasionally, some months, it gets real dire and I have to just really get in there myself and just return to cold calling, which is not an ideal form. Which is kind of like, in building this, it creates a question of like, does this work or is this sustainable? Does it make sense? On the screen is all 17 issues that are out so far, and all 10 games are there. And then each, because I like the zine format, in the center is the cover for each thing. Because each, in a world where there are physical events, I have printed a PDF, or I've created a PDF that is what's available now. But I have also printed small zines for each issue, highlighting each game, because showcasing what is now like 180 games is very difficult were there to be events to have them all queued up and ready to go at any moment. But it's a lot easier for people to flip through a book and get an idea of what they want to see and what they want to play, and finding new ways to present games, because I'm looking to kind of highlight games. Indiepocalypse has sort of become, as I referred to it, as like a home for unmarketable games, because most of them are shorter. Most of them are like, if you've played video games, you know when you go to video game stores what video games look like, what is expected of video games, like in terms of length, in terms of like design, in terms of like there being important gameplay loops, in terms of there being like trends to follow. And I'm looking for Indiepocalypse by design was always meant to be like a piece of outsider work and searching for games that were like, not mainstream. I don't want to say not mainstream, but outsider was the best way to put it. It's a home for outsider art, and to the best that I can muster with my limited reach. And I think it works pretty well. I think that when you create something like this, people naturally will. I get a lot of what I'm looking for, despite not having a big presence, because I think just by its existence, people hear about it, and people are like flock to the things that they know that they want. Because when you don't, obviously you aren't going to get serviced by like other publications, or definitely not things like Steam, or are you going to spend all that time to put your Bitsy game on Switch? Can you put a Bitsy game on Switch? I don't know if you can or not. But, and then how do you charge? Can you do that? Can you charge like $5? I don't know. But I think in general, this is like, despite it being a, let's call it financially unsuccessful venture, I would say that it is emotionally and artistically fulfilling despite all that. And I would highly, highly recommend everyone to try something similar, or to just like, I think collectives are a natural progression for independent art. I think you can only rely on like publishers and like people above you, so to speak, for so long. Whereas peer groups and just like working as a collection tends to, benefit everybody. Because if anything, recent bundles have shown, to like an extreme degree, there have been like a lot of games, but they show if you put a lot of games in one space, people will pay attention. And by putting all of these games in one space, and more importantly, charging $15 per issue, guaranteed, I'm not going below $1 per game. And that is far too generous already. And I'm just hoping that by putting together, by normalizing people paying for them, that I can create kind of like a space for smaller games in the future, and a space where people could sell their half-hour game for $10 and nobody would care because they wanted it, because they enjoyed the experience. Thank you for having me. Go to indiepocalypse.com. Buy Indiepocalypse. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Virtual applause, please, for Andrew. And are you joining the speaker Q&A on Discord now?
Yes, I will go there right now.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And then next up, we have Enrique Lorios. See you soon.